Today, we're diving into the explosive border conflict between Pakistan and Afghanistan that really blew up in October 2025. This is a story that's got everything: modern warfare, deep colonial history, and a geopolitical chessboard that is absolutely on fire. So let's get right into it.
So picture this. It's early October 2025, and the tension along that long, winding border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, it doesn't just simmer, it explodes. And we're not talking about a small border skirmish here. No, this was the most serious military clash since the Taliban took back Kabul in 2021. You've got artillery, drones, and full-on ground assaults lighting up multiple sectors. But it makes you wonder, right? Why? What could possibly push two countries, neighbors that are so deeply connected by history, by culture, what pushes them to the very brink of an all-out war? Well, the answer is complicated, and it's rooted in a single, controversial line drawn on a map more than 100 years ago. Okay, so to really get to the bottom of the why, we first have to break down the what. Let's take a closer look at the actual chain of events that lit the fuse back in October of 2025. The immediate spark was something we've seen before in this part of the world. Pakistan launched a series of operations targeting the Taliban Pakistan, the TTP. Islamabad accused the Afghan Taliban of giving them safe harbor. Well, Kabul fired back, and not just with guns. They came back with furious accusations that Pakistan's airstrikes were a total violation of their sovereignty. And things went from bad to worse, fast. On October 2nd, the first shots were fired. By the 9th, Pakistan had unleashed major airstrikes deep inside Afghanistan. The Taliban's response? Heavy ground assaults. And there were reports they even overran several Pakistani border posts. The fighting just got heavier and heavier until October 15th, when let's just say a very fragile 48-hour ceasefire was announced. Now, of course, you had two completely different stories about what was happening. Islamabad insisted its airstrikes were necessary defensive actions against terrorists. Meanwhile, Kabul was calling it unprovoked aggression. And this war of words is just as important as the actual war on the ground. But here's the thing. Everything we've just talked about, it's really just a symptom of a much deeper, much older wound. To truly understand this fight, we have to go back in time and face the ghost that haunts this entire frontier, the Durand Line. So, the Durand Line is that 1,640-mile border separating the two countries. But it wasn't drawn by Afghans or Pakistanis. Nope. It was drawn up back in 1893 by a British diplomat, Sir Mortimer Durand. It was all part of the Great Game, that old imperial rivalry between Britain and Russia. This line was all about colonial security, not cultural reality. From the Afghan point of view, this has never been just a border. In fact, it's often called a line of hatred. And you can see why, right? It literally sliced right through the heart of the Pashtun people, dividing families, tribes, and a whole way of life that had been there for centuries. And this brings us to the absolute core of the problem. No Afghan government, not the monarchy, not the republic, not the Taliban, has ever formally recognized the Durand Line. They see it as a colonial line in the sand, signed under pressure. Pakistan, on the other hand, sees it completely differently. To them, it's a legally binding international border, something they inherited from the British under established international law.
And here's where the story takes a really ironic twist. For years, Pakistan kind of saw the Afghan Taliban as a strategic asset, right? A way to get what they called strategic depth against their rival, India. Well, that calculation has backfired spectacularly. The TTP, who are ideological brothers with the Afghan Taliban, now use Afghanistan as a staging ground to attack the Pakistani state itself.
So all of this history, all of this bad blood, has now erupted into a really unique kind of modern conflict. It's a textbook case of an asymmetrical war. Let's break down what that actually looks like on the ground. You're looking at a classic military mismatch. On one side, you've got Pakistan with a modern, high-tech military, F-16 fighter jets, advanced drones, satellite intelligence, the works. On the other side, the Afghan Taliban, who have basically no air force. But what they do have is decades of hard-won experience in guerrilla warfare, an unmatched knowledge of that brutal mountain terrain, and fighters with sky-high morale after fighting NATO for 20 years. So, the obvious question is, with all that fancy technology, Pakistan should have the clear upper hand on the battlefield, right? Well, the reports coming out of the conflict zone paint a much more complicated picture. According to a lot of independent journalists and analysts on the ground, Taliban ground forces have actually managed to overrun multiple Pakistani border posts. There are even videos floating around showing Taliban fighters celebrating over-captured territory. And there's a huge psychological factor here too. For Pakistani soldiers, being ordered to fight guys who were once considered allies, that's got to be tough on morale. Now, for its part, Islamabad has dismissed all of this as pure propaganda, so it's hard to verify, but it does suggest the technology isn't the be-all and end-all.
Look, this conflict is not happening in a bubble. It is being watched very, very closely by some major regional and global powers, and every single one of them has a stake in how this plays out. So for China, any instability threatens its massive CPEC infrastructure project. India is watching, maybe seeing a chance for Pakistan's Western Front to be weakened. The U.S. is just wary of any more instability in a region with nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, Gulf states like Qatar and Saudi Arabia are stepping up, offering to mediate. And for countries like Russia and Iran, they're looking at this and saying, see, this is what a failed American exit strategy looks like.
Now, some people have wondered if the Taliban could actually launch a full-scale invasion to reclaim those Pashtun lands inside Pakistan. Let's be really clear. The analysis says this scenario is just not plausible. Afghanistan's economy is in shambles, and it has absolutely no chance against Pakistan's huge conventional military and, this is the big one, its nuclear arsenal. So where does this all go from here? Well, the analysis points to four main possibilities. The most likely, unfortunately, is a long, simmering, low-intensity war. Other paths could include some kind of negotiated settlement, maybe with China playing mediator. There's also a scary possibility of internal fracture inside Pakistan if the war drags on and destabilizes the state. Or you could see a broader regional peace initiative. But at the end of the day, unless the fundamental issues, the legitimacy of the border and these cross-border militant groups are actually dealt with, this powerful quote seems to sum it all up. The Durand Line will remain a battlefield, not a boundary.
Which leaves us with this one final critical question. Real peace is only going to be possible when both sides can finally stop fighting over the ghosts of a colonial past and start doing the incredibly hard work of negotiating a shared future. Whether that can happen, well, that remains to be seen.